The polished marble floor of Stirling Tower was a mirror, reflecting a world of glass and steel, a silent, sterile cathedral to ambition. Leo moved his buffer across its surface in long, practiced arcs, the machine's low hum a familiar mantra against the hollow quiet. His movements were economical, efficient, betraying an inner dignity that had nothing to do with the worn-out uniform he wore. He wasn't sad. He was a man who had made his peace with necessity. In a corner, near a monolithic chrome sculpture, sat his daughter, Maya. Her small form was a splash of soft, warm color in the otherwise monochromatic lobby. A sketchbook lay open on her lap, a box of crayons beside her. The sitter had cancelled, a simple complication that had placed this small, precious son into his cold, professional universe. She was humming, a quiet tune that the vast, empty space almost swallowed whole. The quiet was shattered by the sharp click of heels on marble. Annalise Stirling, the tower's namesake and its queen, swept into the lobby. She was a figure of sharp angles and unflinching resolve, her tailored suit the color of a storm cloud. A phone was pressed to her ear, a weapon in her hand. Her voice was ice. "I don't pay for excuses. I pay for results. If the launch sequence isn't stable by morning, clean out your desk. Failure is not an option, it is a termination offense." The words, sharp and cold, sliced through the air and struck Maya like a physical blow. The little girl flinched, her hand jerking, knocking a half-full bottle of water from the end table beside her. It tipped, spilling across the floor and into the grated housing of a decorative floor light. There was a sharp pop, a fizz of angry blue sparks, and the light went dark. The sudden noise and the darkness startled her. Her face crumpled, and a terrified sob broke from her lips. Annalise ended her call, her gaze finally falling on the disruption. She saw the puddle, the crying child, the janitor. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was another problem, another failure in a day full of them. Leo didn't look at her. His world had shrunk to the size of his daughter's fear. He was there in an instant, kneeling, his large hands gentle on her small shoulders. He didn't speak. He simply absorbed her panic, his presence a steady, unwavering shield. He pointed to the dead light, then to the others still glowing in a line down the hall. He whispered something only she could hear, and her sobs began to quiet. Then he acted. From a worn leather pouch on his belt, he pulled a multi-tool. It was old, the metal scarred with years of use. He opened the floor grate. His fingers moved with a surgeon's precision and an artist's intuition. He didn't try to fix the ruined bulb. He saw the system. With two deft movements, a snip, a twist, a clever rerouting of a wire, he bypassed the shorted unit entirely, restoring the integrity of the circuit. The remaining lights flickered once, then burned steadily, the dark spots simply gone from the sequence. He had not repaired the break. He had redesigned the flow. He turned to Maya and winked, turning a moment of fear into a small, shared secret, a piece of magic only they understood. From her position across the lobby, Annalise had watched the entire exchange. She had expected him to call maintenance, to make an excuse, to become another problem for her to solve. She did not expect the quiet competence. She did not expect the intuitive, brilliant simplicity of the solution. And she certainly did not expect the gentleness of the act. It was an act of profound care, solving an emotional problem with technical grace. She watched him close the grate and murmur to his daughter, his hand stroking her hair. The world of termination offenses and unstable launch sequences felt suddenly distant, flimsy. A crack appeared in the glass wall of her composure. It was a physical sensation, a sharp intake of breath she couldn't control, a feeling of vertigo in her own lobby. This man, this janitor, was an anomaly. He operated on a set of principles her world had no language for. She walked toward them, her heels unnervingly loud in the new quiet. Leo looked up, his expression calm, guarded. Maya hid slightly behind his leg. Annalise stopped a few feet away, her corporate authority feeling like an ill-fitting costume. She looked at the perfectly bypassed light, then at the worn tool in his hand. Her voice was softer now, stripped of its icy edge, replaced by a curiosity that felt foreign and unsettling. Where did you learn how to do that? Leo looked from the powerful woman before him to his daughter, who was his only real answer. He hesitated, the weight of his past a silent burden. He was not a man who sought notice. Notice was dangerous. But the question hung in the air, a bridge to a world he had long since abandoned. I had to fix a lot of broken things, he said, his voice low and steady. It was the truest statement he could make. Annalise held his gaze. She didn't just see a janitor. She saw a solution, though she didn't yet understand the problem. I have an opening in the main engineering division. It's a maintenance oversight position. You'd be looking for problems before they happen. Better pay. Regular hours. She paused. You wouldn't have to bring your daughter to work. He flinched almost imperceptibly at the last part, a quiet sting of shame. He looked down at Maya's hand, now clutching his trousers. The offer was a lifeline, but it was a line into a world that had cost him everything once before. I'm just a janitor, ma'am. I don't think you are. Annalise said, the words more certain than she felt. The position starts Monday. Human Resources will have the paperwork. She turned and walked away before he could refuse, leaving Leo in the quiet lobby, the low hum of his new life already beginning. The 6th floor, home to Sterling's elite R&D engineers, was another world of gleaming surfaces and hushed tension. It was a place of white boards covered in complex algorithms and the quiet, frantic clicking of keyboards. Leo, in his new, crisp maintenance uniform, felt like a ghost haunting a past life. His job was simple: preventive maintenance. He replaced failing power supplies, calibrated diagnostic equipment, and oiled the joints of the robotic arms in the assembly lab. He kept the machine running. He was quiet, observant. He saw the subtle flicker in the server room's cooling system that everyone else missed and fixed it with a simple capacitor swap, preventing a catastrophic server failure. He noticed one of the junior coders was using a deprecated library that was creating memory leaks and left an anonymous note on his monitor with the correct syntax. He fixed things. Small things. He made the whole system run smoother, but his work was invisible, precisely as he preferred. His presence did not go unnoticed by Marcus Thorne. The chief operating officer was a man polished to a high sheen, all ambition and no foundation. He saw the world in terms of hierarchies, and Leo's sudden appearance on his floor was a disruption to his established order. He saw a janitor in an engineer's space. Marcus cornered Leo in the break room one afternoon. He leaned against the counter, a shark gliding into shallow water. I don't know what game you're playing, or who you think you impressed, Marcus began, his voice a low sneer. But down here, we deal in pedigrees and performance, not sob stories from the lobby. Don't get comfortable. It was a probe, designed to put Leo in his place. Leo simply met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He said nothing. He filled his thermos with water, screwed the cap on, and walked away, leaving Marcus simmering in the sterile silence. Leo's refusal to engage, to be intimidated, was more infuriating to Marcus than any retort could have been. He had underestimated the man's core. Annalise watched from a distance. She had cameras everywhere. She saw the small fixes. She saw the confrontation with Marcus. She saw Leo's unwavering calm. Each day, the anomaly he represented grew more profound. He didn't carry the frantic, brittle energy of her other high performers. He carried a stillness, a deep well of competence that she found herself increasingly drawn to. The man she hired to find problems was becoming the solution to a problem within herself she had yet to name. Late one evening, long after the floor had emptied, Annalise was walking the perimeter, a nightly ritual to quiet her racing mind. A light was on in a small, unused design lab at the far end of the hall. She frowned. No one was authorized to be in there. The lab housed prototypes from a decade ago, ghosts of failed projects and forgotten ideas. She peered through the glass panel in the door. There was Leo. He was not cleaning. He was standing before a dusty, dormant drafting table, the kind that used actual paper. A single gooseneck lamp cast a pool of soft light around him. In his hand was a pencil, and on the table was a sketchbook, not Maya's, but his own. It was thick, leather-bound, and worn at the edges, a sacred object. He was drawing. His hand moved across the paper with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing. He was lost to the world, his focus absolute. Annalise couldn't see the details, only the intensity of his concentration, the passion in the line of his back. It was not the posture of a janitor or a maintenance man. It was the posture of a creator, a visionary at the peak of his power. She found the override code for the door and entered silently. He didn't hear her. He was in his sanctuary. She moved closer, her breath catching in her throat. The sketchbook was open to a diagram of a neural network processor. It was not just a diagram. It was a work of art, a thing of sublime elegance and terrifying complexity. The architecture was revolutionary, structured like a biological system, with redundancies and adaptive pathways she had only dreamed of. It was years beyond anything her multi-million-dollar R&D team was developing. On the facing page were notes, equations scribbled in a tight, precise hand. He was solving problems of quantum tunneling and heat dissipation that had plagued the industry for a decade. This was his soul, laid bare on paper. A musical instrument, a skilled tool, a suppressed life. She made a small, involuntary sound. Leo froze. He looked up, his eyes wide with a kind of panic she had not seen before. It was the fear of being truly seen. He snapped the book shut, a reflexive, protective gesture. "What is this?" Annalise asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question was not an accusation. It was puerile. "It's nothing," he said, his voice strained. "Just doodles." "That is not a doodle," she said, her gaze fixed on the closed sketchbook. "That is a symphony." She took a step closer. "Leo, who are you?" He looked away, toward the sterile hallway, a world that demanded so little of him. He had chosen this exile as a penance, as a necessity. He believed he had to be either a father or an engineer. He never believed he could be both. "I was a lead designer at Cygnus," he said, the name of the legendary, now defunct boutique chip design firm hanging in the air. Before my wife died. Before Maya." The confession was stark, stripped of detail, but it explained everything. The quiet competence, the hidden genius, the choice to disappear into a world that would not ask more of him than he was able to give. Annalise looked from the man to the sketchbook, the lock and the key. She finally understood. He wasn't just fixing her machines. He was a master craftsman who had put down his tools. And she had, by pure, blind chance, led him back to his workshop. The first true bond formed between them in that silent, dusty room, a shared intimacy over a genius he had tried to bury. A few days later, Annalise found a reason to ask Leo to work on a Saturday. It was a pretense. She wanted to see Maya again. She found them in the small, sunlit atrium on the top floor, a private garden she had built as her only concession to softness. Leo was recalibrating the automated irrigation system. Maya was sitting on a bench, drawing. "Hello, Maya," Annalise said, sitting on the other end of the bench. She felt awkward, out of place in this small circle of warmth. Maya looked up, her eyes wide and serious. She studied Annalise's face for a long moment, her gaze unnervingly perceptive. "You're not smiling," Maya observed. It was not a question. Annalise was taken aback. "I'm busy. My daddy is busy too," Maya said. "But he smiles from the inside." She went back to her drawing, filling a sky with a brilliant, impossible orange. The simple, profound observation struck Annalise with the force of a physical blow. He smiles from the inside. She had forgotten how to do that. She had forgotten that it was even possible. Her smiles were tools, weapons, masks. They were never for her. Leo finished his work and joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked between the two of them, sensing the delicate shift in the atmosphere. Maya tore the page from her sketchbook. It was a drawing of 3 figures. A large one, a small one, and another tall one with a jagged, scribbled crown. They were all holding hands under a bright orange sun. She held it out to Anneliese. "This is for you." Anneliese took the drawing. Her hands trembled slightly. The paper was cheap, the lines were wobbly, but it was the most profound gift she had ever received. It was an invitation. An acceptance. Maya hadn't drawn the CEO, the queen in her glass tower. She had drawn a person worthy of holding hands, of standing in the sun. "You have sad eyes," Maya said, her voice soft. It was a truth bomb, delivered with the devastating innocence of a child. "But this will make them better." Anneliese looked at the drawing, at the sad-eyed queen with the jagged crown, and felt the thick, icy wall around her heart begin to melt. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not for her power or her success, but for the lonely, aching wound she kept so carefully hidden. This small child had pierced her armor with a crayon. "Thank you, Maya," Anneliese whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And she meant it. The atrium became their sanctuary. A few nights later, after a grueling week, Anneliese found Leo there, sitting on the bench where Maya had given her the drawing. He was just looking out at the city lights, a universe of cold, distant stars. She sat down beside him, leaving a careful space between them. The silence was comfortable, no longer awkward. The drawing was tucked in her portfolio, a secret talisman she carried with her. "Cygnus," she said, breaking the silence. "They were the best." "What happened?" Leo stared out at the city, but he was seeing a different time, a different life. "My wife, Sarah. She was the brilliant one. An astrophysicist. She saw things no one else could. Patterns in the chaos." He smiled, a faint, sad curve of his lips. "We were a team. I built the hardware to test her theories." He paused, the memory still raw. "There was an accident. A drunk driver on a rainy night. I was in the lab, working on a deadline. She was coming to bring me dinner." His voice was flat, a recitation of a story he had told himself 1,000 times. "I got the call. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. Maya was too. My career, the deadlines, the ambition, it all turned to ash. It meant nothing next to this little girl who had just lost her whole world. So I walked away. I chose her. I had to." He finally turned to look at Anneliese, his eyes clear, without a trace of self-pity. "It was a choice, not a tragedy. I don't regret it." The simple, profound integrity of his decision settled in the space between them. He had given up a world she had sacrificed everything to gain, and he was the richer for it. The vulnerability was a gift. Anneliese felt compelled to offer one in return. "My father told me love was a line on a balance sheet. An investment that had to show a return. He was my first partner. We built this company from nothing." She looked at her hands, which had signed so many contracts, fired so many people. "When we were on the verge of going public, he sold his controlling interest from under me to our biggest competitor. He said it was just good business. He took my work, my trust, and he liquidated it. I fought back. I clawed the company back piece by piece. But I learned his lesson. Trust is a liability. Love is a transaction. So I built walls of glass and steel, and I made sure no one could ever get close enough to hurt me again." The confession hung in the quiet garden, raw and real. He told her how his wife died. She told him why her heart was armored. In that moment, surrounded by the artificial life of the atrium, they were no longer a CEO and a maintenance man. They were two survivors, sharing the stories of their scars under the distant city lights. They were soulmates, discovering each other in the wreckage of their pasts. The rain began on a Tuesday. A cold, relentless drizzle that mirrored the atmosphere inside Sterling Tower. Project Chimera, Anneliese's $18 billion gamble on a new AI-driven logistics network, was failing. It was not a small bug, it was a cascading system-wide collapse. The launch was in 3 days, in front of the world's media and a consortium of investors who had staked their futures on her vision. Panic was a fever running through the R&D floors. Her best engineers were stumped, throwing frantic, useless solutions at a problem that seemed to have no source. Marcus Thorne was the calm at the center of the storm. Too calm. He directed the chaos, his expression one of grave concern, but his eyes held a glint of triumph. He had orchestrated this. A hidden, elegant piece of malicious code, a logic bomb disguised as a minor power regulator, was embedded deep in Chimera's core. And he had already chosen his scapegoat. He manufactured the evidence with cold precision, a falsified late-night access log for the primary server room, a fragment of the malicious code found on a discarded data stick from the maintenance closet, an anonymous email to the head of security hinting at industrial espionage. It all pointed to one man. The quiet man who had access everywhere and a past no one could verify. The janitor. Annalise sat in her office, the rain streaking down the panoramic windows like tears. The evidence was on her desk. It was circumstantial but damning. The pressure from her board was immense. They wanted a head. They wanted the problem contained. They saw Leo as the perfect, simple answer. She called him to her office. He stood before her desk, his calm presence a stark contrast to the storm inside her and outside the window. "The Chimera network has been sabotaged," she said, her voice brittle, rehearsed. "Evidence has been found that implicates you." Leo's expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of deep hurt in his eyes. "A wound. You can't possibly believe that." "What I believe is irrelevant," she lied, the words tasting like poison. The weight of her father's lesson, of her entire life's philosophy of survival, pressed down on her. Trust is a liability. The board requires action. "I'm terminating your contract, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." The words were a betrayal. A public execution. For Leo, it was a familiar pain, the world once again casting him aside. For Annalise, it was the sound of her own soul breaking. He simply nodded, a quiet, profound disappointment settling over him. He turned and walked out, leaving Annalise alone in her glass tower, the victor of a battle that had cost her the only thing she had begun to value. She had protected her empire. She had lost herself. The rain continued to fall. Annalise sat in her silent office for an hour, then two. The victory felt hollow, the silence accusatory. Marcus's solution was too neat. The evidence too perfect. Her mind kept returning to the quiet atrium, to the story of a man who gave up everything for his daughter. It kept returning to the sketchbook full of genius, and the gentle way he had fixed the child's fear. That man did not commit sabotage. That man built things. He healed them. And then her eyes fell on her portfolio. She pulled out the child's drawing. The wobbly figures holding hands under an orange sun. "You have sad eyes." The innocent truth of it cut through the corporate lies, the board's pressure, the carefully constructed evidence. Trust is a liability. But what if it wasn't? What if it was the only thing that mattered? She had made a choice. The wrong one. Now, she had to make another. Annalise stood up, her decision made. She bypassed her security chief and went straight to the raw data logs herself. She had a hunch. Marcus was smart, but arrogant. He would have checked his work, admired his own cleverness. It took her 2 hours, but she found it, a single, encrypted login to the Chimera core from Marcus's personal terminal an hour after the logic bomb was planted. A final check. A signature. He had signed his confession without even knowing it. She grabbed her coat. She didn't call. She drove. Leo's apartment was in a quiet, older part of the city, on a street lined with trees. The building was worn but clean, a place of wood floors and warm, yellow light. It was a world away from her own. She knocked, the sound loud in the rainy evening. He opened the door. He wasn't angry. He just looked tired. Defeated. Behind him, she could see Maya, watching with worried eyes. "I was wrong," Annalise said. The 2 words were the hardest she had ever spoken. "I saw the evidence, and I listened to the wrong voices. I know you didn't do it. It was Marcus." Leo's expression softened, the disappointment replaced by a flicker of something else. The system is still failing. Annalise continued, her voice low, urgent. My engineers can't find the flaw. They're looking for a bug, but he didn't build a bug. He built a feature. A malicious one. They can't see it. But you can. I know you can. She wasn't just asking for help. She was offering her trust. It was an alliance. I'm not asking you to come back as an employee, she said, her voice steady. I'm asking you to stand with me. As a partner. Help me save this. Not for the company. For us. The word hung in the air between them. Us. Leo looked past her, at the rain-slicked street, and then back to his daughter, his constant, true north. He saw the trust in Annalise's eyes, a reflection of the vulnerability she had shown him in the garden. This was not the queen from the glass tower. This was the woman with the sad eyes, asking for help. He nodded slowly. Okay, Annalise. Let's go fix what's broken. The emergency board meeting was a tribunal. The room was cold, the long table a slab of polished granite. The faces of the board members were masks of grim anxiety. At the head of the table, Marcus Thorne was delivering a eulogy for Project Chimera, his voice dripping with false regret. At the far end of the room, a massive screen showed the system's status, a cascade of red warnings, the digital heartbeat of the company flatlining. And while the source of this malicious attack is no longer with the company, Marcus said, glancing at Annalise, the damage is done. I'm afraid the system is lost. The door opened. Annalise walked in. And behind her was Leo. A ripple of shock went through the room. Marcus's composure cracked for a second. Annalise, what is the meaning of this? You can't bring him in here. He's with me, Annalise said, her voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard before. She strode to the front, Leo at her side. Marcus, you are a very good liar. But you are not a very good engineer. She gestured to the large whiteboard at the front of the room. Leo picked up a marker. He didn't look at the screen, at the lines of code. He looked at the system in his mind. He began to draw. In clean, swift lines, he sketched out Chimera's core power distribution grid from memory. The board members watched, mesmerized. It was the work of a master. He drew the main conduits, the substations, the regulators. Then, he drew a small circle around a single, insignificant-looking power junction. It's not in the code, Leo said, his voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. The code is doing exactly what it was told to do. The flaw is here. He tapped the circle. It's a feedback loop. An elegant one. Under normal diagnostic loads, it's invisible. It bleeds less than 0.001% of power back into its own regulator. But under full system load, at launch, it compounds exponentially. It doesn't just starve the system of power. It tells the system the starvation is a normal function. It forces the network to cannibalize itself, chasing a problem that isn't there. He put the cap on the marker. It's not a bug. It's a design philosophy. Cruel. Arrogant. Designed to be admired by its creator long after the damage is done. The room was silent. Leo hadn't just identified the flaw. He had painted a perfect psychological portrait of the saboteur. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus, whose face had gone pale, his polished veneers shattered. Annalise held up a tablet, displaying the encrypted log of Marcus's terminal. A philosophy you admired so much, you had to log in one last time to look at your work. The vindication was absolute. The defeat total. Annalise addressed the board, but her eyes were on Leo. For years, this company has valued a single metric: success at any cost. We celebrated disruption and aggression. We built a culture that could produce a man like Marcus Thorne. She shook her head. That ends today. Our greatest asset wasn't our market share or our intellectual property. It was the integrity and genius of a man we weren't even wise enough to see. A man I fired. She looked at Leo. This company will be rebuilt on a new foundation. A foundation of character. Of integrity. Of seeing the person, not just their position. She walked over to Leo and, in front of the board, in front of the entire world of her past, she took his hand. It was not a corporate gesture. It was a public declaration of their unity. A shared look passed between them, a promise of a new world they would build together. The fallout was swift. Marcus was gone, his career a smoldering ruin. The board, shaken and humbled, gave Annalise their unconditional support. The story of the janitor who saved Sterling was a carefully managed press release, one that painted Leo as a humble genius and Annalise as the visionary who discovered him. That night, after the storm had passed and the city was washed clean, Annalise and Leo stood in the quiet sanctuary of the atrium garden. The corrected code was being implemented. Project Chimera was saved. "You didn't just fix the network, you know," Annalise said softly, looking out at the lights. "You fixed me." Leo turned to her, his expression warm. "You weren't broken. Just disconnected." She smiled, a real smile, one that started from the inside. She stepped closer, closing the last bit of space between them. "Leo," she whispered. He didn't need any more words. He gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of peaceful, profound recognition. It was the feeling of coming home. A resolution earned in silence and trust. It was the end of their isolation, and the beginning of everything else. The professional loose ends were tied up in the morning. But the personal ones were resolved right there, under the glass roof of the garden, with the city breathing quietly below them. 6 months later. The afternoon sun streamed into the backyard of a modest, comfortable house with a sprawling garden. Laughter echoed in the warm air. Leo, in jeans and a soft t-shirt, was pushing Maya on a swing he had built himself. Annalise, her hair down, wearing a simple sundress, sat on the porch steps, watching them. The jagged crown was gone. Her eyes were no longer sad. They were full of light. This was their new normal, a happy, domestic tableau that stood in stark, vibrant contrast to the cold, sterile worlds where they had begun. On a table beside her lay the blueprints for their new joint venture. The Sarah Sterling Foundation for Ethical Design. It was a division of the company, but also a non-profit, dedicated to finding and nurturing overlooked genius in underserved communities. The mechanics, the janitors, the quiet ones with brilliance hidden in worn-out notebooks. It was a mission born from his wound and hers, a way to build a better world, not just a richer company. Leo stopped the swing and walked over to Annalise, sitting down beside her on the warm wooden steps. Maya ran off to chase a butterfly in the garden, a splash of color and joy. Annalise leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They didn't speak. They just watched their daughter, their future, dance in the sunlight. It was a final, quiet beat, a summary of a journey from brokenness to a wholeness they had built together. He had saved her empire, not with a trick or a corporate maneuver, but by reminding her what was worth building in the first place. This was their new beginning, built not on glass and steel, but on trust, sunlight, and the unwavering belief that the best things are not acquired but healed. Where are you watching from? From a bustling city, a quiet town, or somewhere in between? If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments, and consider liking and subscribing for more stories that find the extraordinary in the everyday. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop looking for the genius in everyone.